The crimson desert sun dipped below the horizon as Tabitha Zimmerman watched the last shovelful of dirt cover her husband's grave, her heart turning to dust along with her dreams. At 25, she never imagined she'd be a widow in the unforgiving New Mexico territory of 1876, with nothing but a failing homestead and memories that cut like broken glass. "My condolences, Mrs. Zimmerman," the town doctor said, patting her shoulder before climbing onto his wagon. "If you need anything, folks in Cimarron will help." Tabitha clutched her black shawl tighter around her shoulders as the small gathering of neighbors dispersed, leaving her alone with the fresh mound of earth. James had been dead 3 days now, taken by the fever that swept through their small settlement. 3 days, but it felt like a lifetime already. "I don't know how to do this without you," she whispered to the grave marker, a simple wooden cross bearing his name, James Zimmerman, 1849–1876. Beloved husband, the walk back to her homestead was a mile of torture. Every step took her farther from the cemetery but closer to an empty house that no longer felt like home. The small cabin James had built with his own hands stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, surrounded by fields they'd struggled to make fertile for 2 years. A failing endeavor, just like their dreams of a family. Inside, Tabitha lit a lamp and sank into a chair, too numb to cry anymore. The silence pressed in from all sides. No more of James's humming as he whittled by the fire. No more of his easy laugh or strong arms to hold her when the nightmares came. Just emptiness and the relentless ticking of the clock on the mantel. She hadn't the faintest idea how to run the farm alone. Their crops were struggling, the well needed constant maintenance, and winter would arrive in a few months. The meager savings they had wouldn't last long. "One day at a time," she told herself, echoing James's favorite saying. But as she looked around at the life they'd built together, Tabitha wondered if she had the strength for even one more day. Morning came with harsh clarity. Tabitha rose from a restless sleep, donned her dress, and forced herself to walk the property. The fields needed tending, and the few chickens they kept wouldn't feed themselves. Work was the only thing that might keep her sane. By noon, her hands were raw and her back ached. The water pump had seized again, and she'd spent hours trying to fix it with no success. Frustration and grief combined into a potent mixture that finally broke her composure. Tabitha sank to her knees in the dusty yard and sobbed until she had nothing left. "Madam, everything all right?" the voice startled her. Tabitha scrambled to her feet, hastily wiping her face with her apron. A man sat atop a chestnut horse at her property line, hat tipped back to reveal a weathered face perhaps 10 years her senior. "I'm fine," she lied, straightening her shoulders. "Just having trouble with the pump." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion. "Name's Benjamin Young. I ranch about 5 miles east. Heard about your husband. My condolences." "Thank you, Mr. Young." Tabitha's throat tightened. "I'm Tabitha Zimmerman." "Mind if I take a look at that pump?" he asked, already rolling up his sleeves. His forearms were tan and corded with muscle, hands calloused from years of hard work. Too exhausted to protest, Tabitha nodded. She watched as Benjamin, a complete stranger, knelt by the pump and began examining it with practiced ease. His movements were deliberate, confident. "Leather gasket's gone," he announced after a few minutes. "Got a spare back at my place. I can bring it tomorrow if that suits you." "Why would you help me?" The question escaped before she could stop it, raw and suspicious. Benjamin stood, dusting off his hands on his denims. "Because it's the right thing to do, madam. Neighbors help neighbors out here. Otherwise, none of us would survive." His simple honesty disarmed her. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Young." "Ben," he corrected with a small smile. "Mr. Young was my father." "Ben," she repeated, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. Thank you. After he left, promising to return the next day, Tabitha felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. She hadn't spoken more than a few words to anyone since James died. And now this stranger, this cowboy, had appeared out of nowhere, offering help she desperately needed, but was too proud to ask for. True to his word, Benjamin returned the next morning with the needed part. He fixed the pump in under an hour, then surprised her by asking if there was anything else that needed repair. I couldn't possibly ask, she began. You're not asking. I'm offering, he said simply. Lost my wife 5 years back. Know what it's like to face everything alone. The unexpected revelation of shared grief created a bridge between them. Tabitha found herself pointing out the loose boards on the porch steps, the chicken coop with its sagging door, the wagon with its broken axle. Benjamin nodded, assessing each problem. I can handle these. Might take a few days, coming back and forth. I can pay you, Tabitha said stiffly, though she knew her funds were limited. No need, he replied, already pulling tools from his saddlebag. But I wouldn't say no to a meal now and then. Bachelor cooking gets tiresome. Over the next week, Benjamin appeared every morning, worked until dusk, and left with a polite tip of his hat. Tabitha found herself watching the horizon each day, waiting for the sight of his chestnut horse cresting the hill. His quiet presence was oddly comforting, and she began preparing meals with more care than she had since James fell ill. This stew is fine eating, Mrs. Zimmerman, Ben commented on the 5th day, accepting a second helping. They sat at her small kitchen table, the first time she'd invited him inside for a proper meal rather than taking food to him as he worked. Tabitha, she corrected softly, if I'm to call you Ben. His smile revealed a dimple in one cheek. Tabitha it is. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. When he finished, Ben pushed back from the table and pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. Been meaning to give you this, he said, sliding it across to her. Map of your water lines best I can figure. That pump won't give you trouble again if you follow these maintenance steps. Tabitha unfolded the paper to find a detailed drawing of her property, with careful notations about water flow, seasonal adjustments, and repair techniques. The thoughtfulness of it, hours of observation and planning, left her momentarily speechless. I don't know how to thank you, she finally managed. Ben shook his head. No need, but... He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. I noticed your south field isn't producing well. James tried everything, she said, defensiveness creeping into her voice. The soil's just poor there. Not poor, just needs the right approach. Ben leaned forward, enthusiasm warming his voice. That land would be perfect for a garden, different from what most folks try to grow around here. I've had some success with special varieties, drought-resistant vegetables, flowers that can take the heat. Tabitha frowned. Flowers? What use are flowers when I need crops to sell? Some flowers bring beneficial insects that help other plants thrive. And some can be sold to those fancy hotels sprouting up in Las Vegas. He referred to the growing town 40 miles south, where the railroad had recently connected, bringing an influx of travelers and commerce to the New Mexico territory. I don't know the first thing about gardening, Tabitha admitted. Ben's eyes, a warm hazel that reminded her of autumn leaves, lit up with unexpected passion. I could show you. Been experimenting with desert growing for years now. The offer hung between them, weighted with more significance than just agricultural advice. It was the first time either had suggested a future connection beyond the immediate repairs. I'll think on it, she said finally. That night, after Ben had gone, Tabitha stood in the doorway of her cabin, looking out at the land that had once represented hope, and now seemed like an insurmountable burden. The idea of transforming any part of it into something new, something alive and growing, stirred something inside her that she'd thought buried with James. The next morning, Ben didn't arrive at his usual time. By noon, Tabitha found herself pacing, wondering if he'd given up on her property on her. The thought brought an unexpected ache. Just as she'd convinced herself he wasn't coming, she spotted movement on the horizon. Not one horse, but two, with a wagon trailing behind. "Hope you don't mind," Ben called as he approached, leading the second horse loaded with supplies. "Took the liberty of gathering some things we might need." "We?" Tabitha echoed, both alarmed and intrigued. Ben jumped down from his horse and gestured to the wagon. "For the garden, if you're willing to try." The wagon bed was filled with tools, seedlings in small containers, bags of what looked like fertilizer, and wooden frames for some purpose she couldn't determine. "This is too much," she protested. "I can't accept all this." "It's an investment," Ben said simply. "In good land and a good neighbor." He pulled off his hat and looked at her directly. "Look, Tabitha, I know what it's like to lose someone and feel like the world stopped turning, but the land doesn't stop needing tending, and neither do we. Sometimes planting something new is the only way forward." His words struck a chord so deep it almost hurt. Tabitha turned away, blinking back unexpected tears. "The south field, you said?" she asked when she could trust her voice again. Ben's smile was gentle, understanding. "The south field." They spent the afternoon clearing a section of the struggling field. Ben explained his vision as they worked raised beds to control the soil quality, an irrigation system using less water than traditional methods, companion planting to maximize yields. "Learned some of this from a Mexican farmer down near Santa Fe," he explained, showing her how to construct the first raised bed. "Some from a book written by a fella back east, some just from trial and error." Tabitha found herself genuinely interested, asking questions and absorbing his patient explanations. The physical labor was exhausting but somehow cleansing, different from the desperate work of the past weeks. This was building something, not just maintaining. As the sun began to set, they stood side by side, surveying their day's work. 4 raised beds constructed, an area cleared for more tomorrow, and the beginnings of a water-saving irrigation channel. "What do you think?" Ben asked, his voice tentative in a way she hadn't heard before. Tabitha looked at the transformed patch of land, then up at his expectant face. I'd like to see what grows here." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. "That's all I'm asking, just to see what grows." Over the next 2 weeks, the garden took shape. Ben arrived each morning, sometimes with new seedlings or tools, always with ideas and gentle encouragement. Together they built more raised beds, installed the irrigation system, and prepared the soil with the special mixture he developed: compost, river sand, and minerals he discovered helped desert plants thrive. "Now for the planting," Ben announced one clear morning in early May. He laid out rows of seedlings: tomatoes adapted for heat, peppers, herbs, and flowers with bright blooms. "What are these?" Tabitha asked, touching the delicate petals of a golden flower. "Desert marigolds. Tough as boot leather but pretty as a Sunday bonnet. They'll bring butterflies and good insects." Ben knelt beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers as he demonstrated how to plant them. "Gentle hands now, they're stronger than they look, but they need a good start." Tabitha followed his example, her fingers working the soil around the tender roots. There was something deeply satisfying about the process: the cool earth, the promise of life, the careful tending. "My mother had a garden," she found herself saying, "back in Ohio before we came west. I'd forgotten how much I loved helping her." Ben glanced at her, pleased. Gardening gets in the blood. My grandmother could grow anything, even in the driest years. They worked side by side, planting row after row. Ben occasionally guided her hands with his own, showing her the right depth or spacing. Each touch was brief, respectful, but Tabitha found herself increasingly aware of his proximity, the warmth of his skin, the clean scent of soap and leather that surrounded him. By late afternoon, the entire garden was planted. They stood back, dirt-streaked and tired but satisfied, looking at the transformed space. "Now we water and wait," Ben said. "Some of these will show growth within days." "It doesn't seem possible," Tabitha admitted. "This soil was so dead before." "Nothing's ever completely dead," Ben replied, his voice low and thoughtful. "Sometimes life just goes dormant for a while, waiting for the right conditions." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words. For the first time since James's death, Tabitha felt a flutter of something other than grief in her chest. "Would you stay for supper?" she asked impulsively. "I made apple pie this morning." The invitation hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than a simple meal offer. Ben seemed to recognize this, his expression softening. "I'd be honored," he said simply. That evening marked a shift in their relationship. As they ate by lamplight, conversation flowed more freely. Ben told stories of his years ranching, of cattle drives to Colorado, of the changes he'd seen as the territory grew. Tabitha shared memories of her journey west with James, their dreams for the homestead, even some of the struggles they'd faced. "He sounds like he was a good man," Ben said when she described James's determination to make their farm succeed despite setbacks. "He was," Tabitha agreed, surprised to find she could speak of him without the crushing weight of grief. "He wanted so much for us to build something lasting here." "And now you're continuing that," Ben observed, "in a different way perhaps, but still building." His understanding touched her deeply. "Yes, I suppose I am." When Ben finally rose to leave, the night had grown deep. He hesitated at the door, hat in hand. "I'll come check on the garden day after tomorrow, if that's all right. Give the seedlings a chance to settle in." A day without seeing him stretched before her like a small desert. "Of course," she said, maintaining composure. "Thank you again for everything." Ben reached out, his fingers lightly touching her hand for just a moment. "Good night, Tabitha." After he'd gone, Tabitha stood in the doorway watching his silhouette disappear into the darkness. The touch of his hand lingered on hers like a promise. True to his word, Ben returned 2 days later. Tabitha found herself rising earlier than usual, taking extra care with her appearance before chiding herself for vanity. What did it matter how she looked to check on plants? Yet when she saw his approach, her heart quickened traitorously. "Look." Ben called as soon as he dismounted, gesturing excitedly toward the garden. "Come see." Together they knelt by the first row of raised beds. Tiny green shoots had already pushed through the soil, the radishes and some of the hardier herbs making their debut. "It's working," Tabitha whispered, touching one delicate shoot with her fingertip. "Just the beginning," Ben assured her, his smile wide and genuine. "In a few weeks this whole area will be green." The garden became their shared project, a living thing they nurtured together. Ben came 3 or 4 times a week, always with new ideas or adjustments based on the plant's progress. On the days he didn't visit, Tabitha found herself tending the growing things with a devotion that surprised her, talking to the plants as if they could understand her hopes and fears. By June, the garden had transformed the south field into an oasis of green amid the harsh landscape. The first vegetables were ready for harvest: crisp radishes, tender lettuce, and herbs that perfumed the air when touched. The marigolds and other flowers had begun to bloom, attracting butterflies and hummingbirds Tabitha had never seen before. "We should celebrate," Ben suggested one evening as they harvested the first full basket of produce. "Your first successful crop." Tabitha smiled, brushing soil from a perfect radish. "Our first successful crop," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You've done more than you realize," Ben said seriously. "I only showed you how to start. You've put your heart into this garden, Tabitha. It shows." Their eyes met over the basket of vegetables, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Tabitha looked away first, her cheeks warming. "How should we celebrate?" she asked, changing the subject. "I was thinking a proper dinner. Sunday after next. I could bring a bottle of wine I've been saving, and we could cook with these fine vegetables." The idea of a planned social occasion, rather than their usual impromptu meals after working, felt significant. "That sounds lovely," she agreed, heart fluttering beneath her ribs. The anticipated Sunday dinner became a focal point for Tabitha. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, brought out her best tablecloth saved from her trousseau and rarely used, and spent the morning baking bread and preparing a chicken. Ben arrived promptly at 4, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt under his usual vest. He carried not only the promised wine but also a small wrapped package. "For you," he said, presenting it with uncharacteristic shyness. "Just a small token." Inside the brown paper was a book, The Practical Desert Garden by a professor from back east. Tabitha ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond words. "I thought you might like to learn more," Ben explained, "though you've become quite the gardener already." "It's perfect," she assured him. "Thank you." The dinner was the most pleasant evening Tabitha had experienced in longer than she could remember. They cooked together, the vegetables from their garden transforming into a savory stew that they enjoyed with Ben's wine, a luxury Tabitha hadn't tasted since leaving Ohio. As darkness fell, they moved to the porch, sitting side by side in the wooden chairs Ben had repaired weeks earlier. The night air was cool after the heat of day, fragrant with the scent of night-blooming flowers from their garden. "I never thanked you properly," Tabitha said after a comfortable silence, "for everything you've done." Ben shook his head. "No thanks needed." "But there is," she insisted. "When James died, I thought everything was over. The farm, my future, any chance at happiness." She took a steadying breath. "You showed me there was still life to be lived." Ben turned to face her, his expression serious in the lantern light. "After Sarah died, my wife, I felt the same. Like the world had ended but cruelly kept turning anyway." "What changed for you?" He looked out toward the garden, just visible as a darker shadow against the night. "I started planting things. Sounds simple, but it saved me, watching life grow when all I could think about was death. It changed something inside." "Is that why you helped me with the garden? Because it helped you?" Ben was quiet for a long moment. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because I saw something in you from that first day, a strength you didn't know you had." His words warmed her more than the wine had. "I don't feel very strong most days." "That's the thing about strength," Ben said softly. "The strongest people often don't recognize it in themselves." He hesitated, then added, "I've come to admire you greatly, Tabitha, more than I should, perhaps." The implication hung in the air between them. Tabitha's heart raced as she considered her response. James had been gone less than 3 months. Was it disloyal to feel this new connection? "I've grown fond of you too," she whispered, the admission both frightening and freeing. Ben's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I don't want to rush you. I know your heart's still healing." "It is," she agreed, "but that doesn't mean it's stopped beating." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then perhaps we can continue as we have been." Tending the garden, seeing what grows between us naturally. The understanding in his voice, the patience and respect, touched Tabitha deeply. I would like that very much. As summer progressed into July, their garden flourished beyond expectations. Word spread about the unusual success of the Zimmerman homestead south field, and neighbors occasionally stopped by to marvel at the abundance growing in what had been barren soil. Tabitha began selling surplus vegetables and flowers in Cimarron, earning more than she'd expected. Her relationship with Ben grew alongside the plants. He continued visiting regularly, their time together extending beyond garden work to long conversations, shared meals, and quiet evenings on the porch. Each visit deepened their connection, though Ben remained true to his word about not rushing her healing heart. One scorching afternoon in late July, Tabitha was tending the tomatoes when she heard approaching hoofbeats. Expecting Ben, she looked up with a smile that quickly faded when she saw 3 unfamiliar men riding toward her property. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as they approached. The lead rider, a heavy-set man with a florid face beneath his dusty hat, reined in a few yards away. "Afternoon, madam," he called. "This the Zimmerman place?" "It is," she confirmed cautiously. "I'm Tabitha Zimmerman." The man dismounted, followed by his companions. "Name's Wallace Porter. I represent the Cimarron Land Company." He gestured expansively. "Fine piece of property you've got here." Tabitha's wariness increased. "Thank you. What can I do for you, Mr. Porter?" Porter pulled a document from his coat. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Zimmerman. My company's acquiring land in this area for a major cattle operation. We're prepared to make you a generous offer for your homestead." "My land isn't for sale," Tabitha replied immediately. Porter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand your attachment, madam, but a widow alone can't possibly manage a spread this size. The offer I'm authorized to make would set you up comfortably back east." His condescending tone ignited a flash of anger in Tabitha. "As you can see, Mr. Porter, I'm managing quite well." Porter's gaze swept over the thriving garden, his expression hardening slightly. "This little garden patch is charming, but it's hardly a viable operation. The smart move would be to sell while you have a willing buyer." Before Tabitha could respond, the sound of another horse approaching drew their attention. Ben rode up at a canter, his expression tight as he took in the scene. "Everything all right here, Tabitha?" he asked, dismounting and moving to stand beside her. Porter's eyes narrowed. "This is a private business discussion, friend." "Ben Young," Ben introduced himself with deceptive casualness. "I'm Mrs. Zimmerman's neighbor and business partner." The claim surprised Tabitha, but she didn't contradict him. "Then perhaps you can help the lady see reason," Porter said. "This land would serve better as part of a proper ranching operation. We're offering fair market value." Ben's smile was cold. "Funny thing about fair market value, Mr. Porter, Wallace Porter, Mr. Porter. Land tends to be worth what the owner values it at. And this land isn't just another plot to be absorbed into your operation. It's a home, a successful farm. And as you can see," he gestured to the abundant garden, "it's producing quite well." Porter's face reddened. "This is a temporary amusement, not a sustainable enterprise." "Actually," Tabitha interjected, finding her voice strengthened by Ben's presence, "we're developing specialized desert cultivation methods. The Las Vegas hotels are already contracting for our vegetables and flowers, and we're just getting started." Ben gave her a quick, approving glance before facing Porter again. "So you can take your offer and think carefully," Porter interrupted, his genial mask slipping. "Small operations like yours get swallowed up all the time out here. Accidents happen. Water sources get compromised." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. Ben took a step forward, his posture shifting subtly. "That sounded an awful lot like a threat, Mr. Porter." The tension crackled between them until Porter forced another smile. "Just stating facts of frontier life, young. Nothing more." He turned back to Tabitha. "My offer stands for 30 days, Mrs. Zimmerman. I suggest you consider it carefully." With a tip of his hat, he remounted his horse, his companions following suit. "We'll be in touch," Porter called as they rode away. When they were out of earshot, Tabitha let out a shaky breath. "Thank you for arriving when you did." Ben's jaw was still tight with anger. "I don't like the way he spoke to you, or those threats." "Do you think they were serious?" Porter represents some powerful interests, men who aren't used to being refused. Ben ran a hand through his hair. "But threatening a widow trying to make her way, that crosses a line." Tabitha looked out at her flourishing garden, then across the fields to the small cabin she'd shared with James. The land that had once seemed a burden now represented possibility. "I won't sell," she said firmly. "Not after all we've done here, not after." "After what?" Ben asked softly. She met his eyes. After finding reasons to stay. Understanding passed between them, and Ben reached for her hand. "Then we'll make sure Porter and his company understand that." "You called yourself my business partner," Tabitha noted, a question in her voice. Ben looked slightly embarrassed. "I spoke without thinking. I just wanted him to know you weren't alone." He hesitated. "But I've been considering something along those lines, actually." "What do you mean?" "Your success with this garden got me thinking. There's a real opportunity here, especially with the railroad bringing more people to Las Vegas. We could expand, grow more varieties, maybe even build a greenhouse for year-round production." The idea was both exciting and daunting. That would require investment, more land cleared, more materials. "I have savings," Ben said, "and my ranch is doing well if we combined resources." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "It's just a thought, a business arrangement that could benefit us both." Tabitha studied him, sensing there was more to the proposal than practical considerations. "A business arrangement," she repeated slowly. Ben met her gaze, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "For now, unless you might consider something more someday." Her heart quickened at the implication. "Ben, you don't need to answer now," he rushed to add. "I know it's too soon, and there's Porter to deal with, and 1,000 other considerations. I just wanted you to know the possibility exists. When you're ready." The tenderness in his voice, the respect for her grief while still offering hope for the future, moved Tabitha deeply. She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for understanding, and for the possibility." Over the next few weeks, Tabitha and Ben worked with renewed purpose, both in the garden and in preparing for potential trouble from Porter. Ben rode to Cimarron to speak with the sheriff, and made discreet inquiries about the Cimarron Land Company. What he discovered was concerning the company had a reputation for aggressive acquisition tactics, and Porter was known for not taking rejection well. "We need to be vigilant," Ben warned when he returned with the information. "And document everything we're doing here. If they try legal channels to pressure you, we'll need to prove the viability of your operation." Tabitha threw herself into expanding the garden and keeping meticulous records of their harvests and sales. Ben began staying later into the evenings, sometimes not leaving until well after dark, clearly concerned about leaving her alone. One evening in early August, as they sat on the porch after a long day of work, Ben broached a difficult subject. "I've been thinking about Porter's threats," he began. "I'm worried about you out here alone." "I have my father's rifle," Tabitha reminded him, "and the neighbors aren't that far." "Far enough if trouble comes," Ben said grimly. "I was thinking, it might make sense for me to stay here, for a while at least." Tabitha stared at him, startled by the suggestion. "Stay here? In the cabin?" Ben's face reddened slightly in the lantern light. I'd sleep in the barn, of course, just to have someone on the property overnight. The propriety of such an arrangement, even with Ben sleeping in the barn, was questionable. Tongues would wag in Cimmerian. Yet the idea of having him nearby, a protective presence through the vulnerable night hours, was undeniably appealing. "What about your ranch?" she asked. "My foreman can handle things. I'd ride over each morning to check on matters, then return here." Tabitha considered the proposal, weighing social conventions against practical concerns. "People will talk. Let them," Ben said with unexpected firmness. "Your safety matters more than gossip." His protective instinct touched her, but Tabitha wasn't ready to dismiss social considerations entirely. She'd built a respectable life here, and her reputation was one of the few things she had left. What if? She began slowly, an alternative forming in her mind. What if we made it official? The business partnership, I mean. Draw up proper papers, announce it in town. That would give you legitimate reason to be here, protecting our joint investment. Ben's expression brightened. "That's an excellent idea. We could have Lawyer Davis draw up the documents next time we're in Cimmerian. And you could still sleep in the barn," Tabitha added quickly, not quite ready for anything more intimate despite the growing feelings between them. "Of course," Ben agreed readily. "It's just a practical arrangement." But as their eyes met in the lantern light, both knew it was much more than that. The business partnership was formalized the following week. Lawyer Davis drew up the documents making Ben and Tabitha equal partners in what they named Zimmerman Young Desert Gardens. The announcement was posted at the general store in Cimmerian, making their collaboration official and respectable. That night, Ben moved a cot and his few personal belongings into the barn. The knowledge that he was just yards away from her cabin door gave Tabitha a sense of security she hadn't felt since James's death. As August stretched on, their garden operation expanded. Following Ben's suggestion, they cleared additional land and built more raised beds. The first greenhouse, a modest structure with a wooden frame and salvaged glass, took shape along the southern edge of the property. Their routine developed a comfortable rhythm. Mornings began with shared coffee on the porch, planning the day's work. Ben would ride to his ranch to check on operations there, while Tabitha tended the garden and prepared their midday meal. Afternoons were spent working side by side, their movements becoming increasingly synchronized as they learned each other's habits and methods. Evenings were Tabitha's favorite time. After supper, they would sit on the porch watching darkness settle over the land, talking about everything and nothing. Ben told stories of his youth in Missouri, his journey west as a young man, his years of ranching. Tabitha shared memories of her childhood in Ohio, her courtship with James, her early dreams. Gradually, Tabitha found herself speaking of James without the sharp pain that had once accompanied his memory. The grief remained, but it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet acknowledgement of a love that had been real, but was now past. One warm evening in late August, as they sat watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tabitha realized with sudden clarity that she was healing. More than that, she was beginning to imagine a future again, a future that increasingly included the quiet, steadfast man beside her. "Penny for your thoughts," Ben said, noticing her contemplative expression. Tabitha smiled. "I was just thinking how much has changed since spring. How much I've changed. For the better, I hope, definitely for the better." She hesitated, then added softly, "Thanks to you." Ben shook his head. "I just provided a little guidance. The strength was always in you, Tabitha." "Perhaps," she conceded. "But sometimes we need someone to help us find our strength again." She turned to face him directly. You helped me remember how to live, Ben, how to grow." The intensity in her voice shifted something between them. Ben's expression softened as he reached for her hand. "Seeing you come back to life has been like watching the desert bloom after rain," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Beautiful beyond words." The compliment warmed her cheeks. Their hands remained linked, a connection that felt both new and somehow inevitable. The moment was broken by the distant sound of approaching riders. Ben was on his feet immediately, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed, moving to the edge of the porch to peer into the gathering dusk. 3 riders appeared, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Tabitha's heart sank as she recognized Porter's bulky frame leading the group. "Evening, Mrs. Zimmerman," Porter called as they drew near. "Mr. Young." His tone suggested he wasn't surprised to find Ben there. "What brings you out this way, Porter?" Ben asked, his posture deceptively casual, though Tabitha could see the tension in his shoulders. Porter dismounted, his companions remaining on horseback. "Just checking if Mrs. Zimmerman has reconsidered my generous offer. The 30 days are nearly up." "My answer hasn't changed," Tabitha said firmly, moving to stand beside Ben. "My land isn't for sale." Porter's gaze shifted between them, noting their proximity. A sly smile spread across his face. "I see how it is. Found yourself a protector, have you, Mrs. Zimmerman? Moving mighty fast after your husband's passing." The insinuation was deliberately cruel. Tabitha felt her cheeks burn with indignation. "Mr. Young and I are business partners," she said coldly. "As the entire town knows, we've registered our enterprise officially." Porter laughed. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Ben took a step forward, his expression dangerous. "You're insulting a respectable widow on her own property, Porter. I suggest you apologize and leave." "Or what, cowboy?" Porter sneered. "You'll teach me manners." The tension crackled between them. Tabitha placed a restraining hand on Ben's arm, feeling the coiled muscle beneath his sleeve. "Your crude insinuations don't change the facts, Mr. Porter," she said with all the dignity she could muster. "This land is not for sale. Not now, not ever. I suggest you look elsewhere for your expansion." Porter's face hardened. "You're making a mistake, both of you. This little garden project won't last through winter, and partnerships." He glanced meaningfully at Ben. "They have a way of dissolving when pressure is applied." "Is that another threat?" Ben asked quietly. "Just an observation," Porter replied. "Things happen out here, wells dry up, fires start, accidents occur." He remounted his horse. "Think on it, Mrs. Zimmerman. My offer stands for 3 more days. After that, who knows what might happen." With a final contemptuous look, Porter and his men rode away. "I don't like this," Ben said when they were alone again. "Those weren't idle threats." Tabitha nodded, her earlier contentment shattered by the confrontation. "What do? We prepare," Ben said grimly. "And we don't leave the property unguarded, not for a minute." That night, Tabitha found sleep elusive. Porter's veiled threats played through her mind, along with his cruel insinuations about her relationship with Ben. The suggestion that she'd dishonored James's memory by forming a new attachment so quickly stung, despite her rational understanding that Porter had merely been trying to upset her. Had she moved too fast? The question nagged at her as she tossed in her bed. James had been gone less than 6 months. Was it disloyal to feel what she was beginning to feel for Ben? Dawn found her still wrestling with these thoughts. She rose early and was surprised to find Ben already at work, reinforcing the garden's irrigation system with additional supports. Couldn't sleep either. She asked, bringing him a cup of coffee. He accepted the cup gratefully. Kept thinking about Porter's threats, specifically about water. He gestured to the work he'd begun. "If they try to damage our water supply, I want backups in place." His foresight impressed her. "You really think they'll try something? Men like Porter don't make threats they don't intend to follow through on." Ben's expression was grim. "But we'll be ready." They spent the day making preparations, securing the well, reinforcing the barn and outbuildings, checking the perimeter of the property. Ben cleaned both his rifle and Tabitha's, ensuring they were loaded and accessible if needed. As evening approached, Ben saddled his horse. "Where are you going?" Tabitha asked, alarmed. "Just a quick ride to my place to fetch a few things. I'll be back before dark." True to his word, Ben returned as the sun was setting, leading a second horse packed with supplies. Among them was a large canvas tarp and metal barrels. "What's all this?" Tabitha questioned as they unloaded. "Rain catchment system," Ben explained. "Alternative water source if they tamper with the well, and the tarp can protect the most vulnerable plants if needed." His thoroughness touched her deeply. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," Ben admitted. "But as much as I can." He hesitated. "There's something else we should discuss." "What is it?" "If things get dangerous, truly dangerous, we may need to consider temporarily relocating, just until the threat passes." The suggestion took Tabitha aback. "Leave the homestead?" "After all we've done to protect it." "Only as a last resort," Ben assured her. "But your safety matters more than any piece of land or garden." His concern was genuine, but Tabitha felt a spark of resistance. "This isn't just any piece of land, Ben. It's everything James and I worked for. It's where we planned our future, and now it's where I'm building a new one." Ben's expression softened. "I understand that, truly I do, but I won't be driven off by threats," she said firmly. "Not by Porter or anyone else." Ben studied her face, seeming to measure her resolve. Finally, he nodded. "Then we stand our ground, together." The simple declaration together eased some of the tension in Tabitha's chest. Whatever came, she wasn't facing it alone. That night, Ben insisted on taking the first watch, promising to wake Tabitha for the second shift. She agreed reluctantly, extracting a promise that he would actually wake her and not stay up all night himself. Sleep came easier than she'd expected, the exhaustion of the day's preparations catching up with her. When Ben gently shook her awake at 2 in the morning, she rose quickly, pulling on a shawl over her nightdress. "All quiet?" she asked, accepting the rifle he handed her. "Nothing but coyotes and night birds," he confirmed. "I'll be in the barn if you need me. Wake me at first light or sooner if anything seems amiss." Tabitha settled on the porch, rifle across her lap, watching the moonlit landscape. The night was peaceful, almost deceptively so. The garden stretched before her, silver in the moonlight, the plants swaying gently in the night breeze. As she sat in vigilant silence, Tabitha reflected on how precious this place had become to her, not just as James's legacy, but as something new she was creating with Ben. The garden represented more than crops. It was a symbol of renewal, of life continuing after loss. The first hint of dawn was lightening the eastern sky when Tabitha heard it, the distant sound of approaching horses, moving fast. She was on her feet instantly, rifle ready. "Ben," she called sharply. He emerged from the barn within seconds, buckling on his gun belt. "How many? Can't tell yet." Coming from the east. They stood side by side as the riders came into view, 4 men, pushing their horses hard. In the growing light, Tabitha recognized Porter's distinctive silhouette leading the group. "What's he doing here at this hour?" she whispered. Ben's expression was grim. "Nothing good." As the riders drew nearer, Tabitha could see they carried torches, flickering flames held high as they approached. "Fire," Ben growled. "They mean to burn us out." Cold fear washed over Tabitha. Fire was the homesteader's nightmare, capable of destroying in minutes what had taken years to build. "Get inside," Ben ordered. "Bar the door." I'm not hiding while you face them alone, she protested. Before he could argue further, Porter and his men were upon them, reining their horses to a halt at the edge of the garden. "Last chance, Mrs. Zimmerman," Porter shouted. "Sell to us or watch it all burn." Tabitha stepped forward, rifle steady in her hands. "This is my land, Mr. Porter, legally homesteaded and developed. What you're threatening is a crime," Porter laughed. "No crime if there's no witnesses. Just an unfortunate accident that claimed a stubborn widow and her friend." He gestured to his men. "Burn the garden first. Let her see what she's losing." One of the men spurred his horse forward, torch extended toward the nearest raised bed. The crack of Ben's rifle split the dawn silence. The shot kicked up dirt inches from the horse's hooves, causing the animal to rear in panic. "Next one won't miss," Ben called calmly, levering another round into the chamber. Porter's face contorted with rage. "You think you can stop all of us, Cowboy?" "He's not alone," came a new voice from behind them. Tabitha turned to see 3 riders approaching from the west, neighbors from nearby homesteads, all armed. "Heard you might be having trouble, Mrs. Zimmerman," called Thomas Jensen, the closest neighbor. "Thought we'd ride over early and check." Relief flooded through Tabitha. Ben must have sent word yesterday, anticipating Porter's move. Porter surveyed the new arrivals, clearly recalculating his odds. "This isn't your fight, Jensen." "When a neighbor's threatened, it becomes everyone's fight," Jensen replied. "That's how we survive out here." The standoff stretched for several tense moments. Finally, Porter lowered his torch. "This isn't over," he spat. "The company has resources you can't imagine, ways of applying pressure you haven't dreamed of." "Perhaps," Ben acknowledged. "But your company also has investors who might be interested to know their money is funding arson and attempted murder." He nodded toward the horizon. "And there's the sheriff, right on time." Sure enough, another rider was approaching the distinctive figure of Sheriff Matthews from Cimarron. Porter's face paled slightly. "We were just having a discussion about land values. With torches at dawn?" the sheriff asked dryly as he rode up. "Unusual negotiating tactics, Porter. These people threatened us," Porter blustered. "We were defending ourselves." Jensen snorted. 4 armed men against a widow and her partner. Some threat." The sheriff dismounted, his weathered face serious. "I've had reports about your methods, Porter. Complaints from other homesteaders. Seems you don't take no for an answer." "We have legitimate business interests. Save it for the judge," the sheriff interrupted. "I'm placing you under arrest for attempted arson and threatening bodily harm. Your men, too." He glanced at Tabitha. "If Mrs. Zimmerman wishes to press charges, that is." All eyes turned to Tabitha. She looked at Porter's defiant face, then at the garden they'd nearly destroyed, the living symbol of her rebirth after grief. "I do wish to press charges," she said firmly. "And I'll testify to every threat he made." The sheriff nodded. "That'll be enough to keep him locked up for a good while. Might even be enough for the land company to reconsider their expansion plans, once word gets out about their methods." As the sheriff disarmed Porter and his men, preparing to escort them back to Cimarron, the tension that had gripped Tabitha for weeks finally began to ease. The immediate danger had passed, thanks to Ben's foresight and their neighbor's loyalty. "You sent for help," she said to Ben when they had a moment alone. He nodded. "After Porter's last visit, I knew he wouldn't give up easily." "Thank you," she said simply, the words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. Ben's eyes held hers. "We protect what matters, Tabitha. And this," he gestured to the homestead, the garden, and by extension her, "matters more than anything." The conviction in his voice, the depth of feeling barely contained beneath his calm exterior, stirred something powerful within her. In that moment, with the rising sun gilding the garden they'd created together, Tabitha knew with absolute certainty that what had grown between them was as real and vital as the plants they tended. "Ben," she began, her voice thick with emotion. But before she could continue, their neighbors approached to offer support and check that they were unharmed. The moment for private conversation passed, though the connection between them remained, vibrant and unspoken. The aftermath of Porter's arrest brought unexpected benefits. News spread quickly through the territory about the Cimarron Land Company's tactics, prompting an investigation into their operations. Several investors withdrew their support, and within weeks, the company announced it was suspending its expansion plans indefinitely. More significantly for Tabitha and Ben, their garden enterprise gained prominence as the story circulated. People came from miles around to see the desert garden that had been worth defending at gunpoint. Many left with purchases vegetables, flowers, and even seedlings as others became interested in trying Ben's growing techniques. By September, Zimmerman Young Desert Gardens had become something of a local sensation. The Las Vegas hotel buyers increased their orders, and Ben began discussing plans for expanded greenhouses to meet the growing demand. Through it all, their personal relationship deepened, though both maintained a careful propriety. Ben still slept in the barn, and they were careful to present themselves as business partners in public. But the feelings between them continued to grow, nurtured like their garden with daily care and attention. One crisp October morning, almost 8 months after James's death, Tabitha woke to find frost sparkling on the ground the first of the season. She dressed quickly and went outside, concerned about the more delicate plants in the garden. Ben was already there, carefully covering certain beds with the protective cloths they'd prepared. "Will they survive?" she asked, coming to help him. "The hardier ones will. Some may need to come into the greenhouse." He straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. "Winter's coming early this year." Tabitha nodded, gazing at the garden that had transformed her life. Most of the summer vegetables had already been harvested, but the fall crop's hardy greens, root vegetables, certain flowers were still producing well. "I was thinking," Ben said, his tone casual though something in his manner suggested the topic was anything but, "with winter approaching, we should consider our arrangements." "Arrangements," Tabitha echoed, her pulse quickening. "The barn gets mighty cold in winter," he explained. "Not the most practical place for me to stay if we're going to continue our operation through the colder months." "Oh," Tabitha said, unsure where he was heading with this line of thought. Ben turned to face her directly. "Tabitha, I've been meaning to say something for some time now, but I wanted to be sure you were ready to hear it." The seriousness in his voice made her heart race. "What is it?" Ben took a deep breath. "When I first showed you how to plant this garden, I told you we should see what grows between us, that we should let it develop naturally, in its own time." He gestured to the flourishing garden around them. "Look what we've created together. Not just plants and vegetables, but something living and enduring, something that feeds body and soul." Tabitha's throat tightened with emotion as she understood where he was leading. "What's grown between us," Ben continued softly, "is something I never expected to find again after Sarah died. Something I'd like to nurture for the rest of my days if you'll allow it." He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "I love you, Tabitha Zimmerman, not as a replacement for what you lost, but as something new and different. Something that honors the past while looking toward the future." Tears blurred Tabitha's vision. "Ben, I'm not asking for an immediate answer," he rushed to add. "I know there's still healing to be done, but I want you to know my heart and my intentions." His eyes, warm and sincere, held hers. "I want to build a life with you, Tabitha, to see what else we can grow together. The words she'd been holding inside for weeks, perhaps months, finally found their voice. "I love you too, Ben. I think I have for some time now." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise. "Truly, truly," she confirmed. "Loving you doesn't diminish what I had with James. It's just different. A new season." "A new season," Ben repeated, smiling. "I like that." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was a ring, a simple gold band set with a small, perfect emerald. "It was my grandmother's," Ben explained. "Green, like growing things." Tabitha stared at the ring, then at Ben's hopeful face. "Are you asking?" "I am." Ben took a deep breath. "Tabitha Zimmerman, will you marry me? Will you join our lives as we've joined our work, our dreams, our futures?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Tabitha thought of James, of the life they'd planned together, the future cut short by illness and fate. She thought of the months of grief that had followed, the emptiness she'd believed would never be filled. And then she thought of Ben, patient, kind, steadfast Ben, who had shown her that life continued, that joy could be found again, that love could bloom even in the desert of loss. "Yes," she said, the word feeling right and true on her lips. "Yes, I will marry you, Benjamin Young." His face lit with such joy that Tabitha felt her heart might burst. Ben slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her gently into his arms. Their first kiss was sweet and tender, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find love again," Tabitha confessed softly. "After James died, I thought that part of my life was over. And I never thought I'd find someone who understood my heart after Sarah," Ben replied. "Yet here we are." He gestured to the garden surrounding them, thriving despite the morning frost. "Life finds a way, doesn't it? Even in the harshest conditions, with proper care and patience, beautiful things can grow." Tabitha smiled, looking at the ring on her finger, green like new growth, like the future spreading before them. "Grow with me?" she asked, echoing his words from months ago. Ben's answering smile was as warm as the rising sun. "Always." They were married on a clear November day, with the garden now prepared for winter dormancy as their backdrop. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by neighbors who had become friends through the challenges they'd faced together. Ben sold his ranch to his foreman, using the proceeds to expand their operation. By spring, 3 new greenhouses stood on the property, allowing year-round production of the vegetables and flowers that had become their signature products. Their first child, a son they named William, arrived the following autumn, a healthy, strong boy with his father's hazel eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah, named for Ben's first wife, in a gesture that honored the past while embracing their future. The garden continued to expand, becoming a destination for travelers and a model for desert agriculture throughout the territory. Ben's innovative techniques were eventually published in agricultural journals, bringing recognition and visitors from as far away as California and Colorado. As the years passed, Tabitha sometimes thought of the day Ben had first appeared on her property, offering to fix her water pump when she was drowning in grief. How far they had come from that moment, from a widow who thought she'd never love again, and a lonely rancher who found purpose in helping her heal. On the 5th anniversary of their marriage, Ben surprised Tabitha with a special addition to the garden, a small memorial plot with roses planted in honor of James and Sarah, their first spouses. "So we remember where we came from," he explained, "even as we celebrate where we are." The gesture, so typical of Ben's thoughtfulness, brought tears to Tabitha's eyes. "They would be happy for us, I think," she said, placing fresh-cut flowers from their garden between the rose bushes. "I believe they would," Ben agreed, his arm around her waist. "They loved us enough to want our happiness, even after they were gone." As the sun set over their thriving homestead, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Tabitha leaned into her husband's embrace, grateful for the journey that had brought them together. From the depths of grief, through the patient tending of a garden, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love as hardy and resilient as the desert blooms they'd cultivated together. "Grow with me," Ben had said on that spring day when hope seemed impossible. And grow they had not just plants and flowers, but a family, a business, a future rich with possibilities. In the end, it was the garden that had saved them both, teaching them that life continues, that beauty can emerge from barren ground, and that with proper care and patience, love can bloom again even after the harshest winter of the soul.